Hello, everyone, and welcome to this CGHE webinar, which is the fifth in the series on AI in higher education. This is an exciting and timely series, which covers 6 webinars with excellent speakers on various aspects of AI in the sector. So my name is Janja Komljenovic. I'm based at Lancaster University, and I'm the organizer of this webinar series on AI for CG. And today we'll be hearing from Valerio de Stefano and Mariya Ivancheva on AI and academic labor. I'm very excited about this webinar today. Valerio de Stefano is not a higher education researcher, but his work is incredibly valuable for our field. He's a professor and Canada Research Chair in Innovation Law and Society at York University in Canada. And I'm appreciative, Valerio, of you being here in the morning where you're based. And his work focuses on technology and labor. He's a speaker and advisor at various institutions, including the European Parliament and the OECD. And he will speak to us about algorithms and AI and how they affect labor in general. We will then hear from Mariya Ivancheva. Mariya is a senior lecturer at the University of Strathclyde in the UK, based in Glasgow. She is an anthropologist and sociologist of higher education and labor, and has had academic and activist focus for many years. Mariya will act as a discussant to contextualize Valerio's talk for the higher education sector specifically. I'm truly grateful to both of you for coming today, and I think this is a really remarkable panel. But before I hand over to our speakers, there are some brief housekeeping points to mention. So this webinar is being recorded and will be posted online on the CG website in a few weeks. A transcript of the chat function conversation will also be posted. We recommend using the speaker view so you can more clearly see who is talking. To ask a question, use the chat function and write out the question you wish to ask. At the end of the presentations, if your question is selected, you will be invited to ask it yourself directly. Please keep yourself muted during the talks, and then when you have been asked to speak or ask a question, please unmute yourself, switch on your video and state your name and where you're from. About the video, there's no need to have your video on during the webinar, during the talks, but please do so when asking a question if you can. All right, so now I will pass over to Valerio de Stefano for today's CGHE webinar.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Janja. And also thanks, Mariya, for agreeing to be a discussant. And thanks a lot for this invitation. I'm very excited to be here with you. I will try to share my slides. Yes, so the title of my presentation is Negotiating the Algorithm, and it will be clear while I speak that when I say negotiating the algorithm, I mean workers should be able to have a voice in the algorithmic systems that increasingly intervene in their work. They oversee, direct, and in some cases discipline their work. This is a research that is not done in isolation. It is joined with other research that I'm conducting on platform labor, for instance, on remote work for office workers, on fundamental labor rights as human rights, and many other things that are normally captured in the category of the future of work. The problem with this category is that in many cases, the discourse around the future of work has been covering individual aspects of labor and employment regulation and protection, aspects such as dismissal, precarious work and non-standard work, unemployment benefits, but very rarely the research has been focusing also on the collective aspects. If you are more interested in all this line of research, two of my recent publications together with other colleagues and friends are a monograph entitled Your Boss is an Algorithm that I wrote together with Professor Antonio Loisi, and a research agenda on the gig economy and society written with other authors and co-editors that more or less address everything that we're going to discuss today. Another thing that this presentation is not going to be focused on, even though it is certainly an important issue that maybe will come up in the debate, is how many jobs are we going to lose to technology? How many jobs are we going to lose to automation? This is something that is quite important, but it has been covered extensively in economics, scholarship, in sociology, etc. While this is quite important, we also think that it's extremely important and not as under the radar as the quantitative aspects, the qualitative aspects. So how does technology affect the way people work? The people that want to lose a job to automation will anyway be extremely affected by the new technological innovations that are reaching our workplaces. So this research is about that topic. And in order to go into how technology affects our work, we have to do a step back. A step back because when we talk about automation, when we talk about technology and work, and in general, when people talk about employment law or labor law, they think that labor law is just a protective tool. They think that labor laws are only there to protect workers. This is quite an oversimplification, and it's something that you find always in scholarship, in policy papers. This is an oversimplification because labor law also creates and enshrines certain powers and prerogatives on the side of employers. Employers have the right to direct their workforce, to instruct them, to tell them what to do. They have the right to monitor what workers are doing. They also have the right to discipline workers that don't comply with those rules. And all these set of powers are extremely intense in workplaces and are something that doesn't exist outside, or shouldn't exist outside the employment relations, the relationship of an employee and an employer. What is the problem? The problem is that we normally see labor law just as a protective tool, while instead it is, first of all, a tool that creates all these powers, and then in some cases tries to react to the harshest abuses that can stem from the exercise of these powers. And another, I would say, oversimplification about labor protection this time is that it only covers you because you are a weak subject, you have a weak bargaining power, and it only protects your economic welfare, if you want. So it enshrines the minimum wages, it gives you parental leave, collective rights that exist to increase your bargaining power. But at the workplace, we bring ourselves as persons, and as persons, we are also carrying with ourselves, or we should carry with ourselves, all our human rights. And some of the managerial prerogatives of employers can infringe on these human rights. They can affect, for instance, us and discriminate us. They can breach our privacy. They can stifle our voice. So labor protection is not just about making you a little bit better in economic negotiations with your employer. It's also there to protect our human rights at work. The thing is, all this protection that has been stratified over years, is it keeping pace with what's going on in our workplaces? And the answer may be, well, no, it is not. New technologies are used by employers to basically exercise all their powers and augment their powers and prerogatives. They are used in hiring. So where you if you submit your CV to most companies right now, most big companies, they will first skim CVs on the basis of automated software that would again select the few ones that get to an interview. We can talk about it, but there's a lot of discrimination involved in this software selecting people. They have been proved to be discriminating against women and minorities. During interviews, we are subject to surveillance. When we do a job interview, in many cases, this is recorded. And in some cases, employers use software that tracks our eye movement, our eyelid movement, our body language, and this software can basically tell something to our employers about what we think or what were our feelings during the interview. Even though this is absolute baloney, there's no software that can tell what you're thinking. These software are traded on the market as able to do that. Workers are increasingly directed by technology in what they do. Imagine working in an Amazon warehouse. There's a device that tells you where to do, what shelf to look for to get your to get the item that you have to collect. But also this software is used to track what you're doing. If you are a blue-collar worker, they may follow you with a GPS and see how fast you go, for instance, in the warehouse. But if you are a remote worker, or if you are an office worker in general, softwares are used to understand how productive you are by using proxies that sometimes are very unreliable. How many keystrokes you give to your keyboard in a certain moment of time, or taking random screenshots of your screen. And if you are, those screenshots are taken in the wrong moment where you are just relaxing and reading the news to clear your head, then your manager can know about that and can take action against you. There's badges that people wear that also incorporate GPS and follow them around all their movements in the office, track interaction with other colleagues, in some cases record not the content of a conversation, but the tone of voice of people to understand whether people are nervous, if they get nervous when they have certain interactions with certain colleagues. And all of this monitoring, particularly for office workers, for white-collar workers, has been skyrocketing during the pandemic. During the pandemic, many workers were forced to be at home, and employers were forced to leave them working from home. And the reaction from employer to this loss of power in the office was, let's introduce a bunch of software that helps us monitor workers and proctor what they're doing all of the time. And now that this software have been bought, they are not being rolling back. And even if you're going back to the office, this software may well be tracking you even at the office. And all of this data gathering, all of this technological direction, monitoring, supervision can also result in disciplining people through technology. So algorithms can fire people or suggest to fire people that they regard as unproductive. Big data are collected to understand whether someone is looking for another job or is looking to do certain parental choices, for instance, having babies and other things by using your browsing and data history. So we have all of this extremely invasive use of technology that really interferes with the way we work in ways that if we don't sit and analyze them, we tend to basically just now take for granted, but they shouldn't be taken for granted at all. normally the employment relationship has also always involved a certain degree of control on the body and mind of people. The employer can tell you what to do and can tell you also what to say. But in general, workers still retain a certain degree of mental privacy. And these new technologies want to basically get around even that minimum level of privacy that you would have in your head, either by detecting what you're thinking or, which is even worse, by assuming what you're thinking on the basis of snake oil technology that purports to tell the employer what you're thinking, what you're doing, and what you're going to do next. The use, for instance, of headbands, of other things that scan your brain activity at work is on the rise as well. So this is important because, as I said, we are not in the business as usual anymore. This is not something that we have seen in the past. We always had control and supervision at the workplace, but the kind of control that this software allow is, first of all, relentless. You couldn't put a supervisor on the shoulder of every worker in a factory, but you can put a software on the shoulder of every one of us that tracks whatever we're doing every moment, in every moment of our workday. This software basically suggests managers what to do, and in some cases, managers are with their hands tied. If a software that has been bought for, imagine, £1 million suggests that a certain worker is unproductive and should get the sack, the manager is not going to get in the line of fire of that. Even if they think that the software is wrong, it's very difficult that managers will actually try to overrule a decision that comes through technology. Technology is also perceived as neutral, and this is its power in this in this framework, because again, managers, employers will think, well, this is just about data, it's just about math, it's the math that says that you are unproductive and you should get fired. As I said, and as we can discuss more in deep, this software not only in many cases are snake oil, they are unreliable. In many cases, they are also discriminatory in nature. In many cases, they have a certain benchmark of a worker, and that worker is a young white male in the prime age, and everyone that doesn't correspond to the benchmark risk getting misjudged by this software in a disproportionate way compared to the benchmark. The scope and the intensity of control, as I said, are extremely invasive. And what's more, this software doesn't distinguish on employment status. So on you being a freelancer or an employee, or you being an employee or an independent contractor, okay? Normally, employers could only exercise managerial prerogatives to that level vis-a-vis employees. And the law reacted to that by providing employees with certain degree of protections that self-employed people didn't have, because they were not assumed to need this protection. Right now, think about Uber drivers, think about Deliveroo riders, think about precarious teachers. In many cases, they might not be under an employment relationship, but the kind of power the employer or principal or whatever the company exerts on them is tantamount or even more intense compared to the one that is exerted on traditional employees. Now, there are certain rules around the world, in Europe, including some rules that apply to the UK, because even if the UK has left the European Union, it's still part of the Council of Europe. So the European Convention on Human Rights applies to UK subjects and also to UK workers. And the Convention on Human Rights has been interpreted to protect a certain degree of privacy at work. There are other instruments that also protect privacy at work. The most important is, of course, the GDPR, which has a certain degree of protection against fully automated decision making. So when an algorithm decides everything and doesn't need a human to validate its decision, then there are certain safeguards that are in place, including at the workplace, even though at the workplace, again, as I said, there's always a certain degree of power that is given to the employer by default. The problem is that privacy is not enough. First of all, privacy, the scope of privacy protection doesn't normally include inferences. So if data collection is covered, but what the computer thinks out of this data is not necessarily covered by privacy protection. So if the computer or the data collection says that I buy a lot of junk foods, that data collection may be covered by privacy protection, but if then that data is collected anyway, and the inference is that since I buy a lot of junk food, I'm gonna get sick, that inference from junk food to I am gonna get sick is not necessarily protected by privacy protection. So the scope and the real effectiveness of privacy it is of course important, but it's not enough. On top of that, privacy protections, and including the GDPR, may fail to keep pace to the newest ways of invading our privacy. The privacy that invades your brain data, the privacy that invades your mental and emotional privacy, that kind of technology has been introduced massively after all these standards came into place. So we only have, for the moment, one recommendation from the OECD, which is not binding. It is still significant, but not binding, that calls for the protection of brain data, and it calls the protection of, we can call it neuro privacy. But again, other standards may have been adopted before this became an issue that had to be considered by regulators. And also, this is not just about privacy. It is much more than that. As I said, these powers and prerogatives exert and can invade and infringe on your rights on a much broader scope of rights than just privacy. They can affect your right not to be discriminated against. They can have effects on your occupational health and safety. They can stifle collective labor rights, the ability to exert a voice, the ability to join a union, the ability to engage in collective action. So it is not just about strengthening privacy protection. It is about reacting to managerial prerogatives and the ways in which technology enhances the powers of employers in a more holistic way. And to do that, you have to do this by using, again, collective rights, by using rights such as the right to bargain collectively, to try and in a way, put some reins and rationalize the ways in which technology is being introduced in our workplace and it's used to monitor and supervise us. As I said at the beginning, collective rights and labor rights in general are not just there to make you a bit better economically, they're also there to rationalize, to control, to make sure that employers don't abuse their managerial prerogatives in ways that we will consider unacceptable. So they are also there to protect us as human beings at work to protect our human dignity. And many of the systems that I have mentioned, particularly the one that invade your mental privacy, can definitely affect and infringe upon your human dignity. So the collective dimension here is essential. We are not going to get anywhere meaningful just by giving us individual employment rights that maybe we'll have to enforce in court, and maybe will be enforced after costly litigation years after the anything bad occurred. Okay, so we have to be proactive, and only collective rights can effectively be proactive at the workplace. There are certain instruments, I'm not going to bore you to that with all the legal provisions about it, but there are already legal instruments that can be used to better control technology through collective rights to voice. Information and consultation standards are some of them. There are certain conventions from the International Labour Organization that promote collective bargaining on anything that has to do with conditions in terms of employment. So technology definitely affects on that. So they can also be used, these instruments, to better protect people at work. Certain collective rights are also recognized in the GDPR. And when I say what the collective bargaining must have a place in this, I mean that collective agreements, both at the sectoral level, which is not something that is super common in the UK, it's more common in continental Europe, but also at the shop level, also the company level, should regulate the kind of technology that is introduced, particularly the monitoring technology that is introduced at work, how data are collected, and how and the transparency of that data protection, and the storage and processing of this data, ban the most abusive forms of data collection, including data on your mental and emotional privacy, and ensure that humans maintain a certain degree of oversight on the operation of algorithms. If algorithms are black boxes, if algorithms cannot be explained, and the result of what comes out of the algorithm cannot be explained, as many programmers purport that they cannot explain what the algorithm is doing, well, the case should be that you cannot use something that you can't explain over people. Very importantly, I want to be clear about that. Collective rights don't stifle innovation, okay? The places in which collective rights are strong are not less innovative than places in which they aren't. Germany, France are not less innovative than places in which all these rights are not respected and complied with. I'm going to skip on a bunch of legal instruments. The EU is introducing a new AI Act that has to do also with the workplace, and unfortunately doesn't provide for any meaningful collective right for workers. So it will provide certain safeguards against algorithmic surveillance and the use of AI that also interferes with workers' rights. And here we see the example of an instrument that has been prepared by people that don't know how workplace work, and there is no space for collective voice in the functioning of AI at work, at least in this draft that we've seen so far. And even if the parliament is trying to negotiate over changes about that, we still are very far from the kind of control that collective voice should have, that is needed to basically ensure that technology doesn't overstep. The Platform Work Directive, again, is another EU proposed instrument. It will only concern platform workers, and platform workers will have a right to get explanation on how the algorithms work. And very importantly, also their trade unions will be, and their union representatives will be able to have a voice, to be informed about algorithmic decision-making, the decisions that are taken, the systems that are in place, and certain decisions will be subject to review, including with the presence of a human supervisor. And very importantly, the Platform Work Directive excludes the collections or bans the collection of data that have to do with the emotional or psychological state of workers. What's the problem is that this only applies to platform workers. So workers that work for Uber, Deliveroo, the Amazon Mechanical Turk, it doesn't apply to the rest of the workplace, or workplaces. So it's very limited in scope. Certain collective rights don't apply to people that are classified as freelancers. So many platform workers will still be classified as freelancers, and they won't benefit from the full set of protection. And also importantly, in many places in continental Europe, when you want to install a video camera on the workplace to do certain levels of monitoring, you cannot do that. You cannot install that telecamera unless you have an agreement of the unions or the public bodies or the labor inspectorates. This is valid for telecameras, and somehow is a principle that is not valid for much more invasive forms of surveillance that can come through algorithmic management. In the Platform Work Directive, we only have a right as workers, and unions only have a right to be consulted and to be informed, but not a right to negotiate, not a right actually to veto, in some cases, certain the introduction of certain technologies, which is a standard that is far less protective of the standards that we have on video cameras, even though the kind of invasion of privacy and all the other rights that I've mentioned so far that can stem from new technologies is much more significant than what can come out of a simple video camera. So we see that there's always a certain level of techno-determinism involved when regulators interface with technology. They assume that everything that is possible, that everything that is technically possible should also be allowed. And this is something that arguably we should object to. Not everything that technology allows should necessarily be allowed by regulators. In the past, we have banned, for instance, the truth machine at work. You cannot use the truth machine to interview workers. There is no reason why we shouldn't ban certain devices that allow an invasion of privacy that is tantamount to that. We need more attention to rights that go beyond privacy. Again, occupational health and safety, the kind of stress that you get out of being monitored all the time, out of being tracked all the time. The question of non-discrimination is also extremely important. And in general, I will close by saying that we need a right to be human at the workplace. We need a right to be free agents at workplaces without technology that proctors us and monitors and controls us all the time as if we were robots. And with that, I stop, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Valerio, for this excellent talk and a lot of food for thought. And now I hand over to Mariya Ivancheva. So please, for a discussion.
So thanks a lot, Yanya. Do you hear me? Yeah. And just a couple of remarks before I go to discuss Valerio's excellent talk. And I perceive my task today as a sociologist of higher education and academic labor, but also I'm an academic on strike today. USU Scotland, Scottish universities are on strike. And I decided to come here more in my activist role and more to speak also from certain issues that have made me quite aware within the academic profession that need collective action and union bargaining, and which I'm afraid that currently academic unions do not pay enough attention to, even if there is already enough work about that. So I think Valerio's emphasis on regulation is very important. But what's interesting also for me in the talk is the emphasis on non-coercive measures and discipline. You know, and I'm going to speak a bit about certain issues in the academic profession that perhaps we take for granted sometimes. And I'm going to take a higher education perspective in labor, which is not very often, the two things don't usually come together in discussions. And I'm going to speak about different functions of education: teaching, research, and service. And we'll refer to some concepts that he mentioned, but also we'll try to conceptualize things through a social scientific lens. So congratulating the workshops organizers, because this, you know, bringing these two topics together is not very frequent. And also because most recently so much kind of affect has been addressed towards students' use of or overuse of AI in plagiarism. And it has pushed worries of institutional and tech companies using AI to monitor, survey, profile, and exclude our students as well, even if today's talk is not about that. But let's speak about academic labor. And also let's first think, what is it that AI helps in academic labor when you don't think of students only? So it is machine learning, deep learning, and natural language processing that is augmenting our ability first in admin terms to process recruitment, admission, retention, plagiarism, performance data, and automate decision-making. In terms of teaching, it is promoted as adaptive content recommendations, feedback assessments, course syllabus, lectures, assignments, all can be written. And then in terms of research, it can write text and code and process large data set, or help us do that, identify patterns, build models, recommend content. The dark side, as Valerio's talk has poignantly shown, is the question of discipline and control, not only on employees' duties, but also certain changes to working methods, places of work, and so forth that dispossesses workers, infringing upon human rights and dignity and benefits that allow for the social reproduction of workers. So I think social reproduction is quite important here to take into account. So it's not just abstract rights, it is the right to reproduce ourselves. The alleged neutrality and lack of bias, and you know, that kind of faces the reality of AI replicating actual institutional racism, sexism, ableism, classism, and the property rights over a product, which are difficult to find when this product is split into and introduced to a chain of tasks. And I'm going to come to that a bit later. But, you know, let's think about the academic profession more broadly. So academic labor is still labor, and what happens importantly is that through labor, you know, workers sell units of time that are not there, that stops being there to capital. And capital uses new forms of technology to intensify performance per unit of time. So capital is interested in labor power, not in manpower. And the constant availability of ever more intensive, profitable, low or non-maintenance labor power is what it really needs and what it enhances through technology. And AI is now on our radar, but I would take a more conservative position perhaps than Valerio. I think it is temporary, because the new technology that, you know, it is a new technology that replaces a large biomass of labor power, but it is going to be replaced the moment productivity standardizes and becomes a norm, and profit that is generated through it becomes a norm. And then capital is going to flee and look for other investment. And I think, you know, it is helpful to think back to the question of subsumption of labor. In the case of formal subsumption, in the sense of, you know, for instance, how weavers have been, you know, first their activity has been monetized within the labor relation and then transformed, and by now it is machine that does this work. So capital is in constant search for next surplus expanding technology. And technology is always thought of as constantly framed as, democratizing access and expertise. But we are living also in a market with artificially maintained differential value, concentration in certain positions of prestige and power, and of social dumping in others. And there is a very complex polarization going on, which is also expressed in the question of automation of jobs. So it is very important in this way to think of what is it in a profession like academia, which was supposed to be high-skilled and not really automatable, that is now really changing. Where are we to be having this conversation from academia? And then the other thing that is changing is in the era of advanced capitalism, as Richard said, the corrosion of character, or the linear narrative of life progression through social, professional, institutional field. And we're speaking on the one hand of disembeddedness of higher education from a set of social relations to an abstract commodity or asset, and the disembodiedness, on the other hand, of the function it is doing. And the temporal spatial dimensions through the digitalization. So I think we are, even if now AI has entered, we have to think about a longer symbolic process of dispossession. And it is interesting to think, what is it in the academic work that made us think that it wouldn't be going there, and what is it that is susceptible to this process? So we have years spent in upskilling and schooling, and that is profiling within a narrow disciplinary mode, which also disciplines us in a very hierarchical structure of power and prestige between individuals, institutions, national systems, and so forth. And it is very interesting when Valerio was speaking about a machine screening your CV. I was thinking, why is it a problem that a machine screens my CV, but it's not a problem if it is a white privileged male, which usually happens in academic juries still. So there is something there within the question of this new technology that replicates a lot of old technologies, but it just comes in a new guise. Secondly, I think why we're scared about what's happening is that we're thinking of de-skilling, but we are already living in a stratified academic labor market where de-skilling is a fact. We are living in a place where a big male professor manager usually manages the work of postdocs, of teaching buyouts, and each one of them is ever more split into sub-tasks and some sub-professional functions that are then easy to curate online and replace, as we have seen through the entry of EdTech in higher education, through MOOCs, through online degrees and so forth, in which the academic labor force has been outsourced. So a process like this is already underway in higher education, and AI adds fuel to the fire. And then there is a socialization of specific patterns, that is the temporal and spatial functioning of academic cycles. So what we are seeing is that academics are very much socialized in certain cycles, certain types of events, certain types of ritualities of connecting with each other. And this is corroded with part-time fixed-term zero-hour contracts, and it is corroded further with de-skilling and turning our profession into tasks that can more and more easily be curated and replaced. And this is especially now the case with teaching, and we see if AI brings new de-skilling through research, in research as well. And so in that sense, we have to think about where AI contributes by polarizing further the academic labor force. Technology is supposed to unburden academics from teaching and admin to be able to focus on research because that's profitable now, but is that really what it is doing? We are more speaking about the annihilation of time and place, of on-demand content accessible anytime from everywhere, the unfettered flow and transmission of knowledge as pure information content, and the disembeddedness and de-skilling of teaching. but also, and this is important to think, that we are speaking of a new labor market where AI dictates both to us how we are skilled and also how we skill our students. So there is dumping down also of content for certain mass audiences, whereas the privileged audiences would still be exposed mostly to the integral asset of the white male professor. And then the other question is the alienation that is happening through services, micro-credential, degrees, bite-sized content. So thinking that we are reducible to tasks rather than, and that profession should be reduced to marketable content and one that functions to smoothly kind of perpetuate the functioning of capital, rather than something that creates a shock effect, if we are to use Walter Benjamin, or some kind of friction that produces knowledge. So to finish, it is interesting, not to shed a tear about the old privileged academic that is now drifting apart, but is there something that in this new scare of AI, we're kind of maybe forgetting, and isn't there more to think about what's to regulate within the academic profession, what kind of capitals we have? And I think importantly, to think also where is the next place where technology will fly, and how is it that we can regulate not just the relationship between company and users or workers, but to regulate and harness capital, because it will carry on its flight for more surplus extraction and ever more advanced technologies and ever less investment in human workforce. So how do we do that? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mariya, for many things you've opened. Much appreciated. Valerio, would you like to say anything, respond, or shall we open the floor for Q&A in general?
No, I think we can open the floor. I think, yeah.
Okay.
But I would like to thank Mariya, of course, for the discussion.
Thank you. Right, Lee, go ahead.
Oh, right. Okay. It seems that from what you've been saying, legislation really isn't working, or if it is, it's lagging well behind developments in AI. So what is the solution for controlling AI software to stop it being used to contravene human rights and rights to privacy? What are workers going to have to do?
Well, outside of legislation, the only thing that you can do is to try and mobilize and try to include in your bargaining strategies also things that have to do with the kind of control that technology allows. So resist the introduction of software that can lead to increased monitoring and surveillance. Think that every new software can incorporate certain function of monitoring that we don't think of. Imagine your Outlook. I don't know. I use Outlook, and sometimes the status is green, and then it turns yellow after some time, and then at some point it turns red. All that can be used to say whether you were present or not at work. All these things that we don't think about can be used to collect data, and data that can then be used to discipline you. So a first thing that needs to be done is whenever new technologies are proposed and introduced is to ask what they are actually going to be used for, try to exclude the certain uses are gonna be done, and the only thing you can do is through again collective voice and expressing collective concern, and also including this in collective bargaining strategies and also collective action strategies. That's the only other way that I see if legislation is lagging behind as it is.
But that's only going to work where workers are in powerful groups.
That is actually going to work only when workers are in powerful groups. But again, barring legislation and collective action, I cannot think of anything else that works.
Right, thank you very much. There is actually a comment from Wayne, but Wayne, if you're okay to come in and say something about that, I think that would be really relevant and interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, it was just building on the conversation about legislation, and just to let people know about this work that's going on at the Council of Europe. So it is a long process. It is behind the developments in AI for sure, but at least it's attempting to do something. So it's a recognition that the whole purpose of these tools in education context is to affect the developing cognition of the students. And therefore, if we live in a world where we happily regulate medicines before we use those with people. So the question is, if these tools are designed to affect human brains, then we should be thinking about regulation for that as well. But not just focusing on the students, but focusing on the academics themselves. So the meeting is next week. If it goes through there, then it will be probably a 2-year process where, based on lots of evidence gathering. So, I completely agree and accept Valerio's perception here. And I agree that, regulation on its own is inadequate. But I still believe that we need the regulation. And even if the regulation is late and inadequate, we should still be pursuing it. So that's what we're doing at the Council of Europe.
Can I answer to that a second? Because I want to be clear. I think regulation is very useful, and we need much more regulation of these things, including the form of legislation, but also international legislation and standards. So what you're going to do at the Council of Europe is going to be extremely important. My problem with regulation is a problem with the current regulation that doesn't necessarily take enough into account the risks that stem out of the systems. As you say, as you do like with medicine, you want to know what's in the medicine, and you want to be sure that you are not going to kill people. Well, this is not an assumption that regulators do when technology is involved. As I said at the end of my presentation, that the approach there is just techno-deterministic. There is new technology. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to allow us to do a lot of things. And then, without thinking of all the kind of consequences that I outlined in the presentation, and that Mariya also built upon, we are going to have regulators that say, let's just allow it because you don't want to stifle innovation. Well, if innovation is about reading eyelids, maybe we want to stifle that kind of innovation. And so, yes, we absolutely need legislation on that, and the legislation we have is not enough.
Can I just come back very quickly? I completely agree, Valerio. I think everything you said. I think one of the problems we have in the education space is that, like you were saying in your presentation, there is this belief that existing legislation addresses all the issues. So the one we have all the time is issues around data, so GDPR. But the point we're having to make, and the challenge we're having, is getting the policymakers to recognize that, yes, data and the way that that's regulated is fundamentally important, but that's not it. That's not the whole story. It's about things like agency, empowerment. It's about choice of pedagogy. It's about a huge range of different things. And we need to be thinking about those things as well. So thank you very much for your talk. I really found it useful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Well, what I was thinking as well is that now, since the higher education sector is more and more digitalized, we academics are using various platforms, virtual learning environments for teaching, even for on-campus students, emails, and so on and so forth. As we sort of produce the content and use these platforms, obviously we also produce user data. So what we also noticed has emerged already in the sector are sort of new products that are pitched at higher education managers and leadership as saying you can use this to also manage your academic labor and sort of provide measures for new KPIs. So you kind of have AI to complement your work. So virtual learning environments already included services that would automatically produce the structure of your modules or automatically produce some sort of basic structure. But then at the same time, these algorithms are now seeing that they can also be used to actually quite actively manage academic labor and expectations as well. So it's something that we see emerging also for people who have full employment in the sector, not only for precarious outsourced academic labor. So I think that's quite an important development to watch. I'm not sure if you have anything to say about that, Valerio and Mariya.
Yeah, I think that actually this technology will be used by management and supervisors. And in the academic world, I think of deans and everything that comes above them. It's gonna really stratify the rest of the academic population. We'll have a situation in which there will be no distinction if you are a lecturer, if you're a professor, if you're a freelancer or not. Of course, if the more precarious you are, the more you're gonna be affected by this. But the technology applies to everyone and tend to over-monitor, tend to create stress, tend to create occupational health and safety risk, discrimination risk, and stifle collective voice of everyone. So this is something that is going to become a very powerful managerial tool in the hands of the administration of any kind of higher education institution. And this is why it is particularly important that this is perceived as the entire academic workforce as something that they have to care about.
Thanks. Mariya, did you want to finish?
I mean, I was thinking again, I think there is, definitely a peril in that, but I think we have to ask the questions, which is who is benefiting from that and how do we harness, how do we basically try to regulate in a way that those that especially, profit from public higher education can't profit that much. Because the reason why managers are interested in this management is because there is a kind of socialism for the rich going on with a lot of redistribution of public resources through higher education into private hands. So the question is, where do we stop that? And I don't think just regulating the use of certain technology in the hands of management is where this is going to stop. Whereas I think it is important for our individual rights, I also think that we are going to pit it against each other in this struggle as well. And I think, once again, I totally agree with Valerio that it is a matter of collective bargaining, but we still have to tease out what exactly are we bargaining for. And I don't think we're there yet with the current legislation. Yeah,
thank you very much. Also, good comment by Penny on that issue as well. Since we are 2 minutes to the clock, I want to finish the webinar on time. So thank you both so much for coming. We really appreciate it. For everyone who attended, the recording will be published fairly soon on our usual YouTube channel. And we will finish this series on AI in higher education on Thursday with a talk from Christine Odi on ChatGPT in higher education. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.